Well, hello, all you beautiful patrons out there. I hope you're having a great day so far. And I'm not sure it's about to get better with this story, but I know that you're fans of true crime, so you're probably looking forward to hearing all of the shit about this story, and that is a little foreshadowing for sure. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this case. We're going to be talking about the murder of Dylan Redwine, and it is terrible. I want to preface this entire episode by saying, if you are eating, you need to put your food down and just stop. Just stop. Or turn it off, eat, maybe wait a few hours, and then come back and hit play again, because you're probably not going to want to eat anytime after hearing this case either. Because I know I say all the time that this case is a doozy, but this one makes me like physically ill. It was making me sick when I was writing up the notes and doing the research and all of the things. And when you hear what I'm going to tell you and you really stop to think about what I'm saying, I wouldn't be surprised if some of you feel a little bit queasy. You might even want to have a little barf bag nearby. I don't know, but just be prepared, okay? Let's just move on with it right away. Dylan Nicholas Redwine was born in Denver, Colorado on February 6th of 1999 to parents Mark and Elaine. Dylan was their second child. They also had a 7-year-old son who was named Corey, and Mark also had 2 other children from his first marriage as well. The family split up after 18 years, though. Elaine basically decided that she'd had enough of Mark's bullshit. They were separated for years, but then they decided, like many couples do, to get back together and see if they could make their marriage work. But one summer on the 4th of July, their son Corey had reportedly witnessed Mark having sex with a friend of the family while they were all hosting a barbecue at their home. So apparently this happened late at night while Elaine was already in her bed asleep. It's also been reported that Corey struck Mark and told his mother about the entire incident. Elaine wasted no time filing for divorce after that and went back to her maiden name. Their custody battle, like so many, was vicious. But it sounds like it was more vicious than the typical custody battle, because no custody battle is going to be fun. It's called a battle for a reason, but this one was very vicious and it was ongoing. Mark and Elaine reportedly had split custody, but Mark seemed to not take advantage of his parenting time at all. They were given a week-on, week-off schedule by the family court, but both boys lived primarily with Elaine. Mark and Elaine both had demanding jobs that included travel, but Elaine did her best to make things work without any assistance from Mark. Like, Mark just didn't fucking care. Because of his mother's work schedule, this, of course, caused Dylan to end up missing quite a bit of school. It was finally when Elaine's own mother was diagnosed with cancer that she wished to relocate back to her hometown of Colorado Springs. And Colorado Springs was about 300 miles away from where they were living in Durango at this time. This would enable her to be near her mother, as well as other family that would be able to help her with Dylan when she would have to leave town for work. So this whole thing is totally understandable, especially considering Mark did absolutely nothing to share any of the responsibility of parenting Dylan. They went through more lengthy court proceedings in 2011 to change the custody arrangement. And during this, the judge even interviewed Dylan himself to find out what Dylan's wishes were and who he wanted to live with. In the end, Elaine got full custody of Dylan, and she was able to move to be closer to her mom and the rest of her family. Mark was given visitation. All right, guys, I'm going to fast forward a little bit. So on Thanksgiving, Thanksgiving of 2012 was coming up, but Dylan had absolutely no desire whatsoever to spend the holiday with Mark. He was now 13 years old. He was starting to think for himself, but the visit was a court-ordered one, so he didn't have any choice but to just suck it up and go. His mom actually had reached out to her attorney to get some advice because Dylan let Elaine know, I do not want to go to my dad's. It's so freaking boring. We never really spend time together. I just don't want to be there. And the attorney, she told Elaine that, she didn't have any choice if she did not put Dylan on the plane to spend the holiday with Mark. She was going to be in contempt of court. So Dylan reluctantly boarded a flight from Colorado Springs to Durango as scheduled on November 18th of 2012. He was actually supposed to have left the day before on November 17th, but the flight had been canceled and the airline rescheduled him onto this November 18th flight. Mark met Dylan at the airport and took him shopping at Walmart immediately. This shopping trip was recorded by security cameras. After they left Walmart, they went through the McDonald's drive-thru to get Dylan something to eat in the car on his way to Mark's house. Mark didn't have to go to work the following morning, but he was employed as a foreman at United Pipeline Systems. Colleagues would remember him as being chatty and recalled that he mentioned his children to them quite frequently. Like I already mentioned, Dylan really had no desire to stay with his father, and he even had asked permission to stay with his friend Ryan the very first night he arrived. Understandably, Mark said no. I'm not going to be on Mark's side very much, if at all, except for this one time. Because Dylan just got there, Dylan just got to Mark's house, and most parents would want to spend a little quality time with their son before they just run off with their friends for the rest of the time. So, I kind of agree with, Mark's reasoning, as long as he, was planning on spending time with Dylan that evening. So, of course, Dylan was disappointed. The only thing that he was looking forward to was hanging out with his friends. But he did make plans with Ryan to see each other early the next morning. Dylan spent that evening texting friends back and forth until 9:37 p.m. Like I said, he had plans to meet up with Ryan. They were going to meet at 6:45 the following morning. And to that, I'm like, yikes. That is damn early. But apparently it was somewhat normal for the two boys to get up early and hang out together. Besides, Dylan was super excited to see his friend again after having moved away from the area. Plus, he absolutely wanted to get away from his dad for a while. Ryan, however, was totally shocked the next morning when Dylan was a complete no-show. Ryan had set his alarm for 6:30 a.m., and when Dylan hadn't arrived, he shot Dylan where you at text at 6:46 a.m. This was a text that would go unanswered forever. Mark did not report Dylan missing until 6 p.m. on November 19th, after texting him 4 times and calling repeatedly. He had received no reply from his son whatsoever. Most people know that whenever a child goes missing, Every moment counts. But not Mark. Mark called the police only after taking a nap first. Not a single person could understand how he could sleep even though he claimed he had not seen Dylan since 7 a.m. When police arrived to the house, Mark told them that he had left the house that morning at 7:30 a.m. to go run errands. And then he returned to the house at 11:30 a.m. and Dylan was no longer there. Mark had started reaching out to Dylan's friends, but none of them had seen or heard from Dylan either. Then he texted his ex-wife Elaine to ask if she had heard from him. The obvious question to her was, why on earth didn't Mark know where Dylan was? Dylan was staying with him. So alarmed by Dylan's sudden disappearance, Elaine got into her car with her new husband, I think his name was Mike, her son Corey, and they immediately made the drive to Durango. The news spread like proverbial wildfire throughout Durango and the nearby area of Bayview. The idea of a child being kidnapped there wasn't so far-fetched on the surface. Durango did have a fairly high crime rate. In fact, one of the highest crime rates in the entire United States. Broken down, though, the rate of violent crimes like kidnapping and murder is lower than the national average. Most of the crimes in that area were things like burglary and other property crimes. Durango, Colorado is a 19th century railroad town, and it's located at the very southern end of the state. It's the place to go to if you enjoy things like river rafting, hiking, camping, and stargazing in the summer, or downhill skiing during the winter months. A very distraught Elaine drove 6 hours straight from Colorado Springs to Mark's house, intent on confronting him immediately. Understandably, she remained extremely upset. Her stepson Brandon also drove up with his family from Gilbert, Arizona, to help in the search for Dylan. Both Elaine and her stepson Brandon, were absolutely stunned by how relaxed Mark was, though. Mark was just like watching football games and chugging beer like he had not a care in the world. Local authorities all agreed that Mark was indeed behaving quite strangely. Mark had switched off all of the lights promptly at 11 p.m. before he went to bed, which is incredibly odd because most people, especially parents with a missing loved one, child, they keep all the lights in the house on as if to transform the house into a beacon, but not Mark. Most parents with a missing child wouldn't even be able to fall asleep. But when that first search was called off at 1 a.m., Mark again was sound asleep, and he had been asleep for 2 hours. Mark didn't help the searchers look for his son at all, which is the most cuckoo for fucking Cocoa Puffs thing ever. I think that most parents of missing children run the risk of getting in the way, so to speak, rather than totally making themselves completely fucking absent from the entire situation, you know? And at least one of Mark's answers seemed rehearsed when he was asked where Dylan's backpack, cell phone, and iPod were. One would expect those items to be missing had he run away, but even Mark said that it was about a 5% chance that Dylan had run away. Mark also changed his story about a minor injury that had been on Dylan's lip, first saying it was a cracked and bleeding cold sore, which sounds gross. But when police said that they would confirm the cold sore with Elaine and possibly with flight attendants that were working on Dylan's flight, Mark suddenly switched up his answer, and he said that Dylan had split his lip tossing the football around with him when he first got to the house. Meanwhile, efforts to find Dylan continued. Flyers with his photograph and description were distributed everywhere. There was another ground search, and volunteers spent hours combing the countryside and scanning the entire terrain for any clue. What everyone knew and what nobody wanted to say was that the longer Dylan went missing, the more likely it was that he was dead. The police also went to the local reservoir, clearly searching for Dylan's body, but no luck. Dylan seemed to have just vanished into thin air. Mark was interviewed by the local press. While he said, "Dylan, my prayers are with you and I love you very much. He was the light of my life and meant everything to me. He tried and failed to squeeze out a single tear." And also, he did what a lot of guilty people do while giving interviews. He used the past tense twice, which is odd. He must have already known that Dylan was dead. And this reminds me of that fucking loser face Chris Watts. Ugh. Like, I'll probably never do that case, honestly, because I'm friends with a lot of Shanann Watts' friends. I am a promoter with the same company that Shanann was a promoter for, and like on the same team and everything. So I know, pretty much everybody that was mentioned on that the Netflix documentary about the Watts case. And, because of that, I don't really feel that it would be appropriate for me to talk about the case because, they're still very, very hurt, and there's a lot of trauma involved, with that whole case still. So, maybe years in the future with their blessing, but I really can't see myself being able to get through that case because I'd probably be breaking down every 2 seconds. But, yeah, fucking reminds me of what that fucking loser face Chris Watts did. Just talked in past tense and, lying through his teeth while giving an interview. It's just so fucking weird. But anyways, the police noticed that there had been absolutely no cell phone activity on Dylan's phone at all. And surely a teenage runaway would have called and texted his friends. He would have logged into his Facebook account. His friends had all texted him numerous times throughout the day, but not a single one of them had received a reply whatsoever. Elaine and Corey were becoming despondent. Not a fool, Elaine pointed the finger at Mark on television on November 26th. Both she and Corey knew that there was absolutely no way whatsoever that Dylan had run away. Mark had also publicly reiterated that Dylan would not have run away because there was, quote unquote, nothing to run away from. By the time he made that comment on November 27th, the FBI was involved. 2 days after that, the sheriff's office executed a search warrant to search the home of Mark Redwine. His truck was also searched. A bloodhound was sent from nearby New Mexico, but the dog failed to detect Dylan's scent. This breed of dog has a finely tuned sense of smell, and they are reportedly capable of picking up a scent even 6 weeks later. Christmas passed. Then New Year's passed. Then there was another search of Mark's home in February of 2013. Part of an area rug was removed from Mark's house due to the presence of several drops of blood. The blood was proven to be Dylan's. When he was questioned, Mark insisted that Dylan had injured himself during a family barbecue back in 2011. I'm not sure if that was the family barbecue, though. Wink, wink, when he was like fucking that other chick. But yeah, I'm not sure. You know what? It wasn't. So this incident was supposedly Mark and his girlfriend had friends over, and they were having a barbecue, and Dylan was cutting some things in the kitchen and supposedly had cut his finger, and that's where they said that the blood came from. Anyway, during February of 2013, Mark, Elaine, and Corey went on the Dr. Phil show. Both Elaine and Corey were convinced that Mark had something to do with Dylan disappearing. Corey in particular pointed the finger at Mark. His relationship with his father was so strained by this time that he only called him Mark and not Dad. Mark said nothing at first after Corey accused him of making Dylan disappear, preferring to just stare at Corey intently with an odd half smile on his lips. Finally, Mark spoke, only to turn the situation to himself, like a lot of narcissists do. He was telling everyone how he had struggled with this. It was an obvious play for sympathy, but nobody bought it. Surely Dr. Phil holds a doctorate in clinical psychology, so surely he noticed how Mark repeatedly referred to Dylan's disappearance as this, seemingly to kind of distance himself from the situation. And while Mark said no, he did not know where Dylan was, he nodded up and down at the same time as if he were saying yes, he did know. Dr. Phil asked if he would be willing to take a polygraph test. Mark agreed, but asked if he could take it the following day. He kept his appointment, but automatically canceled the polygraph by saying he didn't feel well once he got there. You can't help but wonder if he had gone online and did some research. It's not like polygraphs are really admissible in court or anything. If I was accused of something, though, I would never take one personally, and neither should you. So if you ever get questioned by the police and they ask you to take a polygraph, just say no. You can't get in trouble for saying no. They may be suspect on you, but they're suspect on you anyways. And there's so many things about a polygraph test that, if you're nervous, you could be accused of lying on it because nerves are going to affect the test. So I would never take one. Anyways, I guess that the examiner who was going to be administering the polygraph test, he was livid, and he was telling Mark, you should be doing backflips right now to take this polygraph test, pointing out that Mark had been the last person to have seen Dylan before Dylan disappeared. Which is kind of a weird thing for somebody to say. I mean, it is true, but for him to come right out and say that, I think it's kind of bizarre, but I still agree. I still agree with the statement. Anyways, Dylan's remains were found in June 2013 in a wooded stretch of land off a place called Middle Mountain Road. And this is about 10 miles away from Mark's house. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation, who's the CBI, they revealed that the body had been dumped as if Dylan was just trash rather than a human fucking being. His remains were found a short distance from the nearest road, downhill, which was better to conceal the remains from the rest of the world. Mark, who is obviously, if you look at pictures of him, he is obviously an out-of-shape, middle-aged man. He would not have ventured very far from the road if he was dumping Dylan's body. The CBI uncovered a few bones, but not the entire skeleton. Dylan's skull was missing. Mark told the Denver Post at the time that he was completely blindsided by the discovery of the bones. But this was totally suspect since Mark had talked to his half-brother about how investigators would have to find the rest of the body, including the skull, before they could even determine exactly how Dylan had died. Weird. Around the same time, Kathy Berry, She was a woman who had joined in on the search effort. She had a scary confrontation with Mark at his home shortly after Dylan's initial remains had been found in June. Kathy and another woman named Denise Hess had driven over to Mark's house to confront him about a text he had sent to his ex-wife Elaine, who was their close friend. Denise Hess was suffering from colon cancer at the time, and it was a disease from which she would eventually die of on October 2nd of 2016. Mark had texted Elaine something fucking vile. He said that he hoped Hess would die from cancer. Both women found Mark standing in the doorway of his home, and I guess that Hess began shouting at Mark from Kathy's vehicle. Kathy took her seatbelt off, jumped over Hess in the passenger seat, and was closest to Mark. And she shouted at him, "Shit-eating asshole," or something to that effect. After that, Mark picked up a log and lifted it as if he might try to hit her BMW, or at least the women who were inside of it. She yelled another vulgarity at Mark before she sped away. Now, I guarantee you that Mark just about shit his pants almost 2.5 years later when a couple hiking on Middle Mountain in November of 2015 found Dylan's skull. The skull was found 1.5 miles from where the rest of the bones had been found. A forensic examination revealed the probable cause of death, a fracture above his right or his left eye. But pathologists were forced to admit that without any flesh remaining on the skull, it was literally impossible to determine what the exact cause of Dylan's death was. Anthropologists who studied the skull determined that the injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma in 2 locations. The skull also had 2 small markings that were consistent with tool marks from a knife, which were performed not long after the boy had died. It was thought extremely unlikely that a wild animal would have removed the head from the skeleton and carted it as far as 1.5 miles. That's just craziness. Like an animal would never do that. Investigators said the second site was easily accessible by Middle Mountain Road, which was a road Mark was reportedly very familiar with. Elaine filed a wrongful death suit against Mark on June 29th of 2015, but it would be dismissed due to time frame constraints. It was not a wasted effort, though. This lawsuit reminded anyone interested that Elaine 100% held Mark responsible for the death of their son, Dylan. And of course, Mark being Mark, always denied any involvement in Dylan's disappearance and death. And he even went as far as fucking countersuing Elaine. So I'm fairly sure that all of you are in agreement with me about what a major piece of fucking shithole, garbage, just everything that Mark Redwine is. But it's going to get much, much worse. So be prepared. So 6 weeks after Elaine filed that suit, the sheriff's office named Mark as an official person of interest in the homicide of Dylan Redwine, and the cause of death was no longer undetermined. Mark continued to deny any involvement, remaining as emotionally distant as ever. But this was nothing new. Mark had already had 2 marriages behind him and many strained relationships, including, the strained relationships with all 4 of his children. eldest son, Brandon, saw him, but very reluctantly until 2002. Yet Brandon was always in touch with his younger brothers. It was Corey who had even told him that Dylan was even missing. Brandon and Corey would later testify against Mark. In addition, so did not just one, but both of his former wives. Mark Redwine was a bad husband, and worse, a terrible father. But how did he go from being a poor parent to killing his own son, his own flesh and blood? Corey thought that he had the answer to that question. He felt that Dylan may have confronted Mark with several highly unsettling images and did not live to tell the tale. Now, 1 year before Dylan disappeared, so in November of 2011, Mark had taken both Dylan and Corey on a road trip. I guess they were going to see baseball games or something. Dylan had been using Mark's laptop after Mark had fallen asleep, and Dylan ran across some highly disturbing photos he obviously was not supposed to see. Dylan was like, oh my God, and he got Corey, and the two boys went and locked themselves in the hotel bathroom so that they could have a better look at the photos. There were a number of selfies, and they were all of Mark. Okay, guys, buckle up. One of the selfies was of Mark. He was wearing lingerie and some crudely placed makeup. Another one was of Mark wearing an adult diaper and a red bra and that same yucky makeup. Now, I really try to be one of those nice people that doesn't kink shame, but I mean, I'm honestly not sure that I'm going to be able to help myself when I tell you the rest. Okay, so get ready. It's insane. In another photo Dylan had found, Mark was wearing a diaper that was clearly full of shit. Like so much shit that it was just leaking out of the edges of the diaper. And in another picture, Mark was literally eating the feces out of the diaper. Did you hear me? He was eating the shit. Eating the shit. In the photos, there was shit stuck in Mark's mustache. And he was just going to town like a fat kid destroying an entire cake. And my apologies to any fat kids who may be listening out there. I get it. Cake is good, but shit cannot be good. So, now just a word of warning to all of you listeners. These photos are out there for anyone and everyone to see. All they got to do is a little Google search. I mean, I looked at them because I couldn't believe someone would actually do that. And when I saw the photos, especially the one of him like licking the shit out of the diaper, I like literally threw up in my mouth a little bit. It was absolutely disgusting. And I cannot believe that there are actually people out there that get off on this kind of thing. Like it's so disturbing to me. Anyway, Corey had the foresight to take photos of all of the images using the camera on his cell phone. After seeing these pictures, it's not at all surprising that Dylan was no longer able to look up to Mark, and this had completely destroyed the father-son bond that they may have had at that point. So on August 4th, 2012, this was just 3.5 months before Dylan was murdered, Dylan and his father were alone on a different road trip. This time they went to Boston. Dylan sent Corey a text out of the blue. I guess that Corey was at a movie. He was in the movie theater and his phone just started like blowing up with texts and phone calls from Dylan. And one of the texts said, "Hey, send me those poop pics of Papa because he gave me a speech about you guys being a bad example and I want to show him who really is." Corey refused to send the photos to Dylan, though, although Dylan just literally kept texting him over and over and over again, trying to wear his older brother down. And, he was hoping that Corey would change his mind and send him the pictures. But Corey was feeling like very protective of Dylan and didn't think that any good would come of it if Dylan were to have copies of the pictures himself. He absolutely did not want to do anything that would fuel the conflict between Dylan and Mark. Later that month, though, Corey got into a dispute with Mark himself. Mark was upset that Corey had left liquor bottles at his property while Corey had been staying there with his girlfriend. Mark sent photos of the liquor bottles to Corey, and in response, this is pretty funny, Corey texted the sordid photos to his father. In text messages accompanying the photos, Corey wrote to Mark, "I've got some pictures too." He followed up with further angry texts to Mark, including, "Hey beautiful, you are what you eat. Look in the mirror." Mark texted back asking him, "Why would you want to hurt Dylan?" before going into attack mode. He was calling Corey a thief for taking photos of his selfies, and he exploded, accusing Corey of trying to hurt him, just like Elaine always has. Mark was arrested on July 22nd of 2017 on the job while in Bellingham, Washington. He was now a long-haul truck driver, and his supervisor cooperated with law enforcement. When Mark was arrested, he looked absolutely terrified as he was ordered by police to get out of the cab of his truck and to lie face down in the road. Mark tried fighting extradition, but he lost. He was extradited to Colorado within the week and charged with second-degree murder and child abuse. The indictment mentioned that blood belonging to Dylan was found on his living room floor, blood he later insisted dripped from that injury on his finger, when he had cut his finger at the family barbecue in 2011. And incredibly, Mark would be backed up in court by the woman he was seeing at the time. So the girlfriend he was seeing, what the fuck is wrong with some people? But traces of Dylan's blood was scattered throughout the living room. It was on the floor, it was on the love seat, it was on the corner of the coffee table. A cadaver dog had picked up Dylan's scent in the bed of Mark's truck as well, and also on the clothes he had worn that day. And I do want to mention that all of this evidence was found years before Mark was even arrested. I'm not sure why it took so long to arrest Mark, but perhaps they wanted to dot their I's and cross their T's and make sure that they had all of the sufficient evidence that they needed, because I saw, doing my research, that some people were kind of bashing, and I heard a podcast too that was kind of bashing about how long it took. And the only thing that I can think is, if you're not prepared and you don't have all of the evidence necessary to bring somebody to court, they could easily get off, and then you can't try them for, that same crime again. So they were taking their time, and, while it's sometimes a mystery and sometimes puzzling, that's really the only thing that I can think of as to why it would have taken so long. Far more convincing than the current girlfriend's testimony was Mark's former wife, Betsy's testimony. Betsy had revealed that during a family camping trip while they were married, Mark had looked around and said that it looked like a good place to leave a body. She had laughed it off at the time, but after Dylan went missing, she suddenly realized that Mark really might have been serious. Betsy and Mark had been married for 6 years, and they had the 2 children together. Now, one was Brandon, and I could not find in my research what the other child's name was. There was no mention of that child whatsoever. So they perhaps, are estranged from Mark entirely, because I could not find a peep. In fact, for a while I was thinking Mark only had the 3 sons, and then I saw that, he and Betsy had 2 kids. So I don't know who the other kid is, but I'm sure that, they've led a much happier life not having Mark in their life. So anyways, Betsy had said that when they were divorced, of course, there was a custody dispute. And she said, quote unquote, quite honestly, he was pretty abusive. And she also told investigators that Mark repeatedly violated a custody agreement, and he told her that he would kill the kids before he ever let her have them. She wouldn't go into more detail, but she did say that she took those threats from Mark very seriously. The trial was pushed back repeatedly, and for a variety of reasons. One being because Mark's attorney had been arrested for domestic violence, and he would have to go get a new attorney. It was also pushed back because of the COVID-19 lockdown, and then yet again because Mark's new attorney exhibited symptoms of COVID-19. But once the trial was underway in 2021, witness after witness was called, including Brandon Redwine, who gave testimony about a conversation he had with his father. He talked about this conversation where Mark had been mentioning head trauma, not just once, but 4 times. And this struck Brandon as extremely odd. The entire extended family, except for Mark, because of course we all know that Mark did not lift a finger to help, was desperate to find Dylan alive and well at the time. But Brandon recalled telling his wife that, Mark just literally told me how he did it. Mark did not testify at his own trial. His lawyer presented a ludicrous theory that Dylan had just wandered off only to be shot by a hunter who somehow neglected to call the police and had just left the body where it was. Or didn't call the police because they had deliberately killed Dylan for reasons unknown. If you were wondering about those disturbing selfies that Corey and Dylan had found on Mark's laptop, of course, those were presented in court. Could you imagine? Mark, through his lawyer, insisted that Elaine had photoshopped those images just to embarrass him. Nice try, Mark. The prosecution would contend that Mark had killed Dylan in a fit of rage after the teenager confronted him about those highly embarrassing images, which prompted a bitter argument that Mark chose to settle by taking Dylan's life, not only to punish his son, but to also hurt his ex-wife, Elaine. Mark Redwine was found guilty of both second-degree murder and child abuse on July 16th of 2021, so just a year ago. In addressing Mark, the judge said the evidence against him was just overwhelming. Here's what he said. First of all, you killed your son, a 13-year-old boy. At 13, he's still a little boy. As the father, it's your obligation to protect your son, keep him from harm. Instead of that, you inflicted enough injury on him to kill him in your living room. after the passion of whatever caused you to act the way you did subsided, you didn't think about Dylan. You thought about yourself. You sanitized the crime scene. You hid Dylan's body, and you went so far as to remove his head from the rest of his body. The judge went on to say that Mark's efforts to conceal Dylan's body and lie continuously about what happened caused extreme suffering for Dylan's entire family and the entire community. His actions deprived Dylan the opportunity to grow up, to fall in love, get married, and have children of his own. In handing down the maximum penalty, the judge said that Mark Redwine takes absolutely no responsibility for what he did to Dylan and needs to be removed from society for a long period of time. Sentencing was scheduled for October 2021, and the maximum sentence was going to be 48 years. When October rolled around, that was exactly the sentence he was given. 48 years in prison. And Mark was already 59 years old, and it's pretty obvious that Mark is going to die behind prison walls, as he fucking should. So the judge was 6th Judicial District Court Judge Jeffrey Wilson. And this is what he said during the sentencing. I have trouble remembering a convicted criminal defendant that has shown such an utter lack of remorse for his criminal behavior. Mark, who was wearing an orange jail-issued jumpsuit, declined to speak, but his attorney said that he plans to appeal. But in a pre-sentence investigation, which looks into the legal and social background of convicted criminals and gives them a chance to weigh in, Mark wrote a few terse words while maintaining his innocence. Judge Wilson read those comments into the record at the sentencing hearing. This is what it said. Innocent of all charges, miscarriage of justice, fake conviction, sham trial. Then he also wrote, I take this circumstance very seriously and want to make clear that I too have lost a child I love more than life itself. I will fight for true justice, not for myself, but for Dylan. I have always shown remorse for the things that I am guilty of. Stand against fake justice. What a fucking tool. There's no way that he's not guilty. No fucking way. Public defense lawyer John Moran made several legal arguments, some that will likely show up in a future appeal, as long as his appeal is not turned down or whatever. He also asked that certain statements and findings be stricken from the pre-sentence investigation. He said, Mr. Redwine loved Dylan with all his heart. The depth of grief Dylan's loved ones have experienced may never leave a high watermark. Mr. Redwine is eager for fair and impartial review by a higher court. He is appealing and wishes to make no further record here. What do you guys think? Do you guys agree that he is guilty? I think he is. I heard also, while I was listening to this other podcast, I'm going to put it in the notes, the show notes, so you guys can see what it's all about. I can't for the life of me. Well, let me look it up real quick. I can tell you guys what the name of it is. If you guys like podcasts that talk about, you can hear court proceedings. I don't always enjoy things like that. I usually like podcasts similar, to this podcast. I listen to Killer Queens. I listen to Mama Mystery. I listen to Gruesome, Wicked and Grim. Those are all amazing podcasts. Necronomipod. Those guys are fucking hilarious. those are all podcasts that I enjoy listening to. And oh gosh, I can't find the one that I was listening to, but I will put it in my notes here. It's actually, there's many episodes. I want to say there's a good 8 to 10 episodes of just this case alone, and it's all testimony, redacted, people, like there's different people like playing out the different parts from the testimony in court. So it's very interesting. You'll learn, like if you want to deep dive further into this case, I didn't want to do that to you guys. I didn't want to make more than, just this one episode on it. But there is a lot more information. But what I was going to get at is, I did hear on that podcast that Mark's neighbor across the street had seen that the night that Dylan got there, was it November 18th? The lights had been left on overnight because she had woken up in the middle of the night to use the restroom and had peeked out the window. And I guess she noticed that the light had been left on because Mark traveled for work quite a bit. So a lot of times, like when Dylan wasn't there and Mark wasn't home, like the whole house would literally be dark constantly. So that's what like really made her notice that the light had been left on overnight. But when she got up, the light had been turned off. I think she said it was like 7 a.m. when she looked and the light was no longer on. So I'm certain by this point that Dylan was already deceased. And Mark was already, taking Dylan's body out to be dumped. So, but, let's have a conversation in the comments. Like, let me know. Like, does anybody think this man is innocent? Does anybody think that this man is actually going to be able to appeal? Because a lot of times appeals get turned down. So, I don't know. The whole thing is fucking crazy. And it's obvious by looking at pictures of Mark Redwine that, he just looks like totally fucking like beat up, like with the bulging eyes, and his skin is like super red and like ruddy. Like I have alcoholics in my family, and they have that same type of color to their skin. And just by Mark's behavior, I just think that his behavior, like, I'm not sure if any of it is from like a true personality disorder. I did hear that he had been abused by his stepdad when he was a kid, but that's no excuse to like murder your own child. Perhaps he used alcohol as a crutch, and it kind of changed his personality when he drank too much. I also know, and I normally wouldn't say this on a regular podcast episode because my mom might get embarrassed, but there's no way she's ever going to hear this episode. I don't really think she's ever going to sign on to be a patron here on Patreon. But my mom, after she divorced my dad, they were high school sweethearts. She gave birth to me about a month after they graduated from high school. They got married before they graduated from high school. And I was born, so thank God I was not a prom night dumpster baby. But they were married for years and years and years. And when I was in my early 20s, they finally got divorced. A few years later, my mom met her second husband. She was going to Al-Anon meetings, and my stepdad was in AA, and the meetings were at the same church. So, of course, he started courting my mom, leaving her flowers on her car or under her windshield and leaving her little love notes, and eventually they went out on coffee dates and all this stuff. But he was not only a recovering alcoholic, but he was also diagnosed with bipolar. And I'm very understanding about mental illness. So I'm not hacking on him at all for having a mental illness or any kind of, bipolar, but his meds, like when you have bipolar, a lot of times your meds don't work anymore, so then they have to readjust them. So they had been married, they were super happy for a while, and his meds needed adjusting, or he stopped taking his meds, or just all these different things. And then he fell off the wagon, and he was an extremely violent alcoholic. So they started having a lot of marital problems. But I remember him doing like some crazy ass shit, like dressing up in women's clothes. And my mom found a locked toolbox in the garage of his, and she thought it was weird that there was a lock on it. So she had my sister break into it, like cut the lock and open it, and there was like all these like Polaroid pictures of my stepdad dressed up as a woman, like sitting on a rock in like a park, and he was like meeting guys and like cheating on my mom with men. And if you want to live that lifestyle, I'm all for people being who they are and doing what they want to do. So I'm not shaming him for this, but what I am shaming him for is for lying to my mom about, who he was or what he wanted to do. And he should have just been honest with her, because that was like a terrible thing for her to find. And I don't know how much of it was actually things that he was into, or how much, like, I don't know if like your alcoholism or your meds can kind of cause you to always want to go one step further in your like kinky stuff. I don't know. So I'm just kind of trying to wonder if Mark Redwine was on any kind of medications, because I couldn't find any information about that. I don't know, but it was clear that, he drank a lot. I did find that out in my research. So maybe he just kept going to extremes on, things that turned him on, and, got into this group of people that liked eating shit and pooping in diapers and watching people eat shit. I don't know. That's fucking gross. I mean, dressing up in women's clothing and all that kind of stuff, if you're into that, I'm not going to shame anybody for that. But eating shit, yes, I'm absolutely going to laugh my ass off about how fucking gross Mark Redwine is for doing that. Ugh, so nasty. But anyways, I'm going to let you guys go. I hope you enjoyed this exclusive Patreon episode. There will be more. There's going to be at least one every month. I may surprise you with extra episodes whenever I have time to make some extra content. And eventually, as the podcast keeps growing and as we have more members here in Patreon, I'll probably start that third tier again, where I will offer a lot more things. We'll probably do some live, some Zooms. I'm going to look into doing all the things, and really building this community over time. And right now we're just getting started. It's so much fun. I hope you guys are having fun too. If there are any episodes or any cases, that you want to hear me talk about, please let me know, because I love getting emails and messages on Instagram of people requesting certain cases. So don't be shy. Reach out to me and let me know what you guys want to hear. Okay? So until next time, you know what I'm going to say. Say it with me. Keep talking crime.